No apology this morning, Chair, but we have 5 members at the moment absent from the meeting. We assume that they're coming.
I'll put in apologies from Councillor Stitt and Simon. They're both away on holiday. Not together, I may add.
Councillor Crullers, I think he's running late, but I think I put apologies for Councillor Crullers.
Councillor Crullers running late.
Councillor Gilroy will be late. She's coming, but she's held up.
And Councillor Scobie has offered no apologies, but is not here yet.
Okay, moving on. Any declarations of interest this morning? No. Item 3, community engagement process for integration of libraries, registration and customer services, outcome of the consultation. As you know, this committee authorised officers in February to engage with communities as part of the integration. Officers now bring back to us the results of that engagement, and members will see a series of community events held throughout March at which proposed opening hours of the libraries were discussed, as well as proposals to integrate libraries, registration and customer services. At each of those meetings, those in attendance were advised if they disagreed with the proposed opening hours, they should submit business cases. This resulted in the submission of 4 business cases from Lagham, Wigton, Moffat and Whithorn. Officers recommend an increase in hours at each of these facilities. These recommendations take account of some of the issues raised and demonstrate that we are a listening council. They do, however, come at a cost in that they will reduce the savings by £26,000. These costs will require to be found elsewhere. Officers are also recommending that opening hours be reviewed after 12 months, and I think this is a sensible suggestion. Anything wish to add to the report, Mr Haswell?
I know, Chairman, quite happy for myself or Richard or Annie to take questions.
Okay, members have any questions? Councillor Driver?
Thanks, Chair. I just want some clarification, if I can, Richard, about the Langham issue. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion happening with community development trusts and things like that. It's just the clarity that nothing will happen until the transfer, if you like, of the 3 existing groups into the 1 existing groups. We're going to happen there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Happy to clarify that, discussion's ongoing, and now that will continue, and we'll make sure that there's ongoing dialogue.
Thompson? Thank
you, Chair. Well, Primal, if I could just first ask, I mean, from the business cases that the communities have submitted, obviously I welcome the recognition that more hours might be appropriate. The census data is used from 2001 in this report, but some of the business cases have put forward 2011 census data, and I was just wondering why we couldn't have refreshed our own data to reflect that rather than wait for the communities to provide that.
Sorry, that was to allow us to apply a standard set of criteria across Year 1 and Year 2 integration. At the time of producing the indicative population model, 2011 census data wasn't available. That was what was used against Year 1, and therefore we applied the same on Year 2.
Okay, thanks for that. So I understand that that's to make sure that across the board everybody would be applied with the same criteria. I think though what's sort of emerged is that there's questions about that criteria that obviously, given that there is new information that's more accurate and up to date, are we left to apply inaccurate information just because we've done it elsewhere?
I think, if I could answer that question, sorry Annie, we are doing integration over 2 years. It would be entirely unfair to use one set of figures for those who have been through the integration process in Year 1 and a different set for those who are going through the integration in Year 2. So it was an even-handed application. In the end of the day, we're applying the same rules for everybody, and in governance terms, and that is the correct way to do it. To apply 2 different sets of data would, I think, lead to claims of unfairness, or could lead to claims of unfairness, and differentials in the way communities have been dealt with. So the intention was to deal with all communities on an even-handed basis.
Thank you. Obviously excluding the rural communities that don't fit in with that particular model. Just with that in mind then, obviously I'd imagine that we would like to have a look at this again in future to make sure how this integration process has gone. So what kind of, how would we best go about ensuring that we are applying the right criteria across the board in future, given that, you know, there's new census information, there's rural communities that may wish to feel included within their customer service area. I mean, have we got a take on that at the moment?
On completion of the second year of integration, we'll come back to members We've already undertaken to review the situation in these 4 cases in 12 months. We'll just review the lot in 12 months and come back with a report to members once the integration process is completed and the savings for the current financial year have been achieved. We will constantly review the situation and bring it back to members if there are issues arising.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I think just on the back of that then, much as I welcome the additional 3 hours, particularly in my own ward where Moffat's concerned, what's the basis for 3 hours? I mean, is this a kind of rough and ready reckoner thing, or is there actual, is there sort of a rational case for determining how much extra hours have been awarded?
We looked at the information brought forward by within the business case, looked at it across the board and did a ready reckoner, a sort of pro rata thing. It was not particularly scientific, I've got to be honest with you. The scientific way of doing it is to apply the rules rigidly and reduce everybody's hours. What we did was we looked at the business cases that had come forward and we said they have made a reasonable case here. For example, in the case of Wigton, you're looking at the fact that it's the book town, the fact that the hall, the community facility is open, etc., etc. So if members want to go back to the scientific way of doing it, we would need to go back to where we started and the rules that we applied for all the other communities that already had integration in their area.
Thanks, Chair, for your indulgence. So I take it we're trying to move away, obviously, as the report suggests, from the indicative population model to focus more on usage as a basis for how we determine hours, etc., for the different services. So are we really going to have to encourage our communities to, as it were, sweat their resources to really push the case for how we review this next year? And then that way we'll get a better measure of how the communities are actually using the facilities, and that in turn can inform what the best hours of opening would be.
We will look at that, but at the moment the usage of facilities is going down, not going up. So you're right, if communities use the facilities and require further opening hours, we would need to look at that. But that will have to be done as part of the budget development process for next year.
Thanks, Chair. Just in the back of what Mr Haswell and Councillor Thompson has said, I would suggest that we add an additional recommendation to bring a report back prior to this time next year when we'll actually have gone through the budget process. Because we're moving away from the model and looking at usage, I would like to see a report come back in the next 6 months to see what the usage has been, because we've got libraries like Castle Douglas, which really, looking at the model, they were probably at the top of the line for getting hours increased. The community didn't make a fuss at the time, but that may be different when they look at the press in a week or two's time and see that there's been 3 communities have had hours increased, which were out with the plan. I think we should be maybe looking at this in 6 months' time, and if nothing else, it'll help us look at budget development for this time next year, rather than do it after the budget's been set in a year's time.
Fine, sir, not a problem. We've got library usage across the piece. We keep very good statistical information, very good performance information on the usage of libraries. As I say, the stats show that the vast majority of the libraries are being underused, considerably underused. When you talk to the staff, they will admit that they're underused. So yes, we will bring the information back to members in advance of setting the budget. We'll look at the methodology. I mean, the methodology was agreed 18 months ago, maybe more than that. We will look at the criteria we apply. We'll get members to agree the criteria, as we did before, and take it forward.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Maitland?
Yes, please. Just a question of fact, actually, about in paragraph 3.3, which was that we were to find the minutes of each of the meetings. Now, the reason I'm interested in that is because Kirkcudbright had 50 people attending the meeting, apparently, but no record of the minutes in Appendix 1. And I suspect probably that the town is more interested in the integration issues rather than the library hours, but I wonder if I could have some confirmation that that is the case.
Yes, sorry, apologies. The minutes were taken out. They have been distributed to each of the communities via the Customer Service Centre and libraries, and by email to anybody who requested that was done. And Kirkcudbright, there wasn't a real challenge in terms of the number of hours, and in fact it was quite a positive meeting. We were quite accepting of proposals. I think across the board, communities were appreciative of the fact that we were going out and even just giving a bit of information about what integration does mean. It was quite a positive meeting.
Anybody else? Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I know that we're not really, well, Lochside is mentioning this, but just for clarity, are the figures for Lochside including Lincluden and the new Barnhill development, which I don't think they are, and that was just a consideration, it's not for anything else at this moment in time, but what I'm looking for here is some form of assurance that the potential of integrating the library in Lochside into the proposed new Max High would be a consideration. Can we take that forward as a yes? You're nodding.
I think the answer to that, Chairman, is yes. I'm conscious of the fact that the Lochside was specifically referred to when members agreed to this, and you'll see there was nobody turned up at Lochside at the meeting. I think what we as officers will do will be to look at the three areas that you've mentioned, Councillor Ferguson, and take it forward as a future possibility in terms of the new school.
If there's no other questions, move to the recommendations. And recommendation 2.1 is to note. 2.2, consider the business cases and that increase the proposed opening hours. And 2.3, agree to increase the proposed opening hours at these facilities as detailed in section 335. And we'd add a 2.4, and that is that this committee review the criteria. If we're going to review all the facilities as part of the budget making process, I think we need to review the criteria, because I think the point was well made. We're operating in a 2001 census, which I thought was a misprint at one. At first I thought it was 2011, but it was 2001. It's now 2014, nearly 2015 by the time we fix the budget. So I think we need to review the criteria. And obviously usage is another criteria that needs to be looked at as well. So I think if members are happy with that, we'll move on. Thank you. Move on to item 4. So it's Community Facilities Review Asset Transfer Management process. And I think that part of this year's budget, we agreed that 10 council properties would be taken forward through the Asset Transfer Management Agreement process. This report sets out the process of engagement, communication with communities involved, and paragraph 317 shows the extent of the consultation and the work which we undertake in relation to ensuring that any facilities transferred are fit for purpose, and with standardised agreements setting out clearly the continuing responsibilities of both the council and management committees of the transferred properties. Local members are kept fully informed with the outcome of discussions, and this committee will receive 6 monthly progress reports. And if there's any questions, Mr Haswell and his colleagues will be happy to answer them. Archie?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at recommendation 2.4, and it says the last sentence, facilities review process are detailed in paragraph 320. There isn't a paragraph 320. I would imagine it'd be 319 there and things like that. But just to come to the appendix of the actual report, now there's going to be a lot of work done with these community groups. I just want to be comfortable, Chair, that the officers have the resource and the availability to actually do this amount of work in the time that they're suggesting.
Councillor Driver, we're all under the cosh in terms of resources, particularly at senior officer level. We accept, we've set the deadlines, we've set the timetables, we've made arrangements within CCS for officers to, at least part of their time, be dedicated to this work. Karen Brownlee has 2 jobs at the moment. So we have set the deadlines. If the deadlines are slipping, we'll let members know. But the intention is that we'll do it. I'll accept responsibility, sir.
He's already got 2 jobs. Finlay?
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to note my appreciation of what Karen and Derek Archibald have done in my patch in Dalry and New Galloway, and and what could be difficult circumstances. One of the things that is potentially a stumbling block is the cost of the work that is required to be done on buildings to bring them up to a standard that then the buildings can be passed on, because I think both Dalry or Glen Kens Community Centre and New Galloway Town Hall, the preferred route is not to go down the management contract, but actually to go to an asset transfer. And I think one of the difficulties is the communities are having are actually understanding how much money there is to get these buildings into a fit-for-purpose state. On the appendix on page 56, it says that there may be a requirement for a small-scale capital investment to fund any necessary works. How big or how small is a small-scale capital investment? Because it's my understanding that even on the one project, the Glen Kens Community Centre, we could be looking at 100,000 plus to bring it up to a standard that would be fit for the community to take on. So it's just an indicative figure, if you like, of how small scale this is, and could that potentially be a stumbling block to the communities taking these properties over? And what sort of time scales are we looking at for getting the work done?
I can just kick off, Chair, and then maybe pass over to Karen for some detail. I think it's fair to say, Councillor Carson, there's no one-size-fits-all. We've certainly made allocation within the CCS capital programme for one-off capital investment in these facilities in order to secure the long-term revenue savings that we've been identified and agreed with elected members. And it's getting that balance, I guess, between that the level of that one-off capital investment against the sort of short, medium and longer term ongoing revenue budget savings. What we certainly don't want to be doing is transferring a liability to any of the community management groups. We want to make sure that the buildings that we transfer are sustainable to allow the process to work. But I don't know if Karen's got anything to add in terms of the specific detail.
Thank you, Richard. I would just like to add into that I am working closely with Property and Architectural Services to come up with a baseline of minimum capital works that would be done. And as Richard said, it's not one size fits all. The process will have to go through a sort of building by building. We are looking at things like condition service, accessibility, electrical, and as I say, we are looking at the baseline of what the minimum we will do, and we'll work through that and certainly discuss that with management committees moving forward.
Will there be a point where, for example, a building's needing £150,000 worth of work done in it to pass it over in a fit state, where the council will say, well, actually, this is not good value for money. We can see you've got a business plan to keep the hall open and you're going to run this activity and that activity, but we just don't have £150,000 to repair your roof and put new electrics in. Because that's a position that the council need to come to very quickly, because the communities have done quite a lot of work, and that's going to be the make or break, because they need to know how much money they've got to find themselves to invest in the building. So I would suggest that the quicker we can come to the decision on whether the investment that required is going to be value for money and whether the project's going to go ahead, is critical to this keep moving forward.
Certainly, Chair, through you. There's certainly been ongoing discussion with management committees in that regard, and understanding the tipping point, if you like, in terms of value for money. And certainly the discussions that we've had to date, some of them have been based on, as Karen has said, identifying what would be the most appropriate minimum spend, but then working with the community groups thereafter to access external monies that aren't available to the council. And I think that's one of the key issues and one of the selling points that we've used in terms of the discussions with management committees thus far.
Thank you.
I think, Chairman, to give Councillor Carson, for example, Isle of Whithorn. Isle of Whithorn pulled in £900,000 from Big Lottery, was it? On the back of what we did to the building, enabled them to move the thing forward. So we're not just going to willy-nilly spend the council's money. You can be assured that if figures start to come across my desk that I find unpalatable, I'll come back to members.
Jane?
Thank you. This I'm sorry, I'm slightly expanding the envelope because this is to do with a question that came up at Kirkmabrec Community Council last night concerning the Waverley Hall. Now, the Waverley Hall is not in this list here, but it is a question of, it is on the council's books. And I know that you've been talking to them, but the question is, again, rather like Councillor Carson, in order to get them to take it over, because you can't sell it, it's not selling, so it's still on the council's books, and we are required to keep it wind and watertight, so we're better to get rid of it if we possibly can. And I'm just wondering where that fits in this sort of scheme of things. I don't want to extend the debate, but I'm just saying that there is another one in here.
Okay, can I suggest that Richard will see after the meeting, because it's not on this agenda today, and we have got other issues to deal with, so we'll move on.
Yeah.
Alistair?
Thanks very much, Chair. Going back to the process, as it were, of agreeing with communities just exactly what will be done, as it were, in relation to the hall, with a view to them taking it over. When, and my question is presumably, Chair, directed to Mr Haswell in particular, when, in fact, will that be binding or be deemed to be binding? And the reason I'm asking the question is that Alex, Chair, has already mentioned the tremendous example of the Isle of Whithorn in relation to its hall. I will say there's another community in the South Machars, and due deference to Graham Nicholl, it was before multi-member wards, where in fact there was about nearly £30,000 spent in upgrading and enhancing their village hall on the basis that they would take it over. And after the work was done, the community scratched their head, thought again and said, well, on second thoughts, we'll no go down that route. So they get £30,000 spent in a hall which was in a much better state than it previously was, but it's still in council ownership. So my question essentially, Chair, would be at what stage do we impart the binding element into any such arrangement to stop that recurring in the future?
The point's well made, sir, and I remember the individual member of this council very well who encouraged this community to do just that. We won't get caught that way again, if that's not too blunt a way to put it. Any agreements will be signed up, and we will have proper arrangements with the communities in advance of anything being done.
Thanks for the assurance, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose, again, I'm just looking for assurance here, because a number of these are community facilities where we have activities going on, older people, and I'm just looking for assurance that the officers dealing with this particular issue are actually working alongside the officers in social work who are currently reviewing day centres and daycare facilities for older people. And the rider to that is, and the potential use for them in the future as we move to an integrated world.
I think, through you, Chair, very valid point. Yes is the answer to the question. We're certainly in discussion with colleagues across education, social work, etc., where this cuts across a number of agendas, and we will continue to do so. Really important.
Thank you. Ian?
Apologies for lateness, Chair. Answer my question was on the previous agenda items, so fine, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just under point 3.9, the standardised management agreement. It was just to get a wee bit more detail on the council retaining a proportion of the existing revenue budget for each facility, given that we'd still have a liability for being wind and watertight, etc. So I was just wanting a wee bit of clarity. How's that proportion worked out, and what sort of protection do we have, given that it'll be a management committee or whatever that's taking the income for the facility, how we protect and safeguard that in the future?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that the elements of the budget that have been retained are specifically the health and safety elements and the repairs and maintenance elements. So moving forward, the council will still have a budget to upkeep the facilities in a wind and watertight fashion, as well as the maintenance and repairs of things like heating systems, your bigger systems within buildings. So those two elements have been specifically retained and are not within the budget figures presented to you.
So, I mean, would there be a situation where the management committee, the first proposal proportion of income that they have would somehow go in terms of a rental agreement to the council, or is that worked out on a facility by facility basis?
I think, Chair, thus far it's been facility by facilities. What this process has highlighted is that perhaps the council's agreed disposal policy doesn't cover the level of detail that we need, and subsequently, as members will see at 3.11, we've got a community asset transfer policy coming to Policy and Resources Committee, which would go into this specific level of detail, so that we've got members' approval in terms of how we work that moving forward.
Thanks very much, Chair. Again, it's on the back of that paragraph 3.9. I would put it to you, sir, that it would seem to me there's something of an inconsistency in the council's stance there at this moment in time, because I'm aware of at least one property in the Mid-Galloway area which is let to an organisation where in fact it's a tenant's repairing lease with obligations. In fact, there'll be a meeting a week on the 25th of April, as I understand, with representatives of that organisation to discuss that very point. And I'm looking particularly at Graham, as a fellow Mid-Galloway councillor. And my concern, sir, is that, in certain circumstances we appear not to be being consistent here, and in these circumstances there may in fact be adverse impacts on community groups in question. So I think that's got to be looked at in a wider context as well, Chair.
I'm hoping that the report that's coming to PNR will look at that, sir. What has happened is historically buildings have been transferred, or management committees have taken over, particularly in the east of Dumfries and Galloway. The council tended to hold on to the halls in the west, but these inconsistencies are becoming very clear, which is why we're proposing to have a standardised lease arrangement, a standardised management agreement with the management committees. I think you're referring to Macher's Action, is that correct, sir? Or am I wrong?
No, sir, I'm referring to the building that's let to the Whitehorn Trust, and where the Trust are now finding all sorts of things coming out the woodwork which are causing a fair degree of angst and concern. I'll leave it at that.
We'll look at that one offline.
Ryan?
Thanks, Chair. I go back to the original question that was asked regarding resources, and I would suggest a question that cuts across all of the inquiries that members have made thus far this morning, and that's about the time frame in terms of achieving outcomes or not, as the case may be, in respect of outcomes. I think members would find it helpful to have some sort of indication of where we are in the negotiations with initiatives and communities with regard taking on responsibility for properties, because that can be a great drain on resources where it goes on endlessly. There have been numerous discussions with members previously about how we handle the negotiations and the sort of time frames that are injected into that timetable. And I would appreciate some clarity around the meeting of those schedules previously agreed. I think I get the impression from Mr Haswell that a forthcoming report will cover that area, but I think clarity at this point in time would be helpful. And we did set out to ensure that any initiatives expressing an interest would not be able to just simply sit back in their laurels until it came up their hump to come up with the information that was necessary for the council to make a decision as to whether it was a viable way forward for that property or not. So some clarity around that would be helpful at this time, but future reference to those schedules would also be helpful for members.
Chair, very happy to update members, and specifically possibly better done on a ward-by-ward basis, given the number of properties that we're dealing with, and Karen and I will gladly do that. Clearly a driver for us in terms of timescales is the fact that members have agreed that we have 83k's worth of savings in the current financial year to deliver on, and therefore it would not be in our best interest to allow these negotiations to continue. We need to get on and work with communities in a proactive way to make this happen, but happy to pick that up on a ward-by-ward basis if that's appropriate, Deputy Leader.
Graham? Sorry, Brian, we'll come back in.
Yeah, I'd just like some assurance that those schedules are being met as we speak at the present time, and and to remind members what those schedules are.
Certainly, I can pick up on that one. We are at the very early stages of meeting with and having initial discussions with management committees. Now, some, and I'll give an example, New Galloway Town Hall discussions actually started last year with that one, and hence the reason it is on this plan. For those facilities that are new onto the 14-15 list, we are just in the initial stages of the process of discussing with management committees, but happy to feedback on a regular basis to ward members on how that is progressing.
I thank Karen for that answer, but it gives me great cause for concern. I'm aware of a number of properties that have been ongoing for a lot longer than has been indicated, but maybe that's been in the course of other changes that have taken place. And I reflect back to an earlier statement from Mr. Haswell. Have you only got 2 jobs, Karen?
Maybe I could give
Didn't apply to that one.
No, maybe give Councillor Collins an answer. In terms of property disposal and property transfer, the council now has a policy document which we will be updating when we come back to members on the transfer issue. I think I'm aware of the properties that Councillor Collins is referring to, where there's been some proposed management takeover or proposed takeover of an asset. We actually have timelines for that, for the larger ones. But we will look at this and make sure that we dovetail the timelines. It's really a member decision. How long are you prepared to talk to people before you say, no, we're not talking to you any longer?
Sorry, thanks for your indulgence, Chair, but I thought that decision, as far as I'm concerned, that decision had already been taken by members. So it's very cut and dried as far as members concerned, but that assurance doesn't seem to be there, and I think we need to firm that up.
Graham?
Thanks, Chair. In one of his answers, Richard mentioned the words tipping point, where capital expenditure and value are not going to be balanced. What are the criteria for reaching that tipping point? I know each individual case will have to be dealt with in its own merits. Is usage of the facility after the takeover one of these criteria? And when can we get these sort of surveys done? Because communities need clarity. They want to see how things are going to move forward and as quick as possible.
That's why we're dealing with property. We are talking directly with the communities, and we will ascertain what is required to be spent on an individual building to bring it forward. We're doing it on a building by building basis, a community by community basis. I don't think Richard had a figure in mind when he said the tipping point. I don't think we can clearly do that. I would give members the reassurance that officers will deal with the detail, the negotiations with the communities. If there are issues where we feel that we're going to have to spend too much on a building, or the building is not viable, then we will come back to members before a final decision is taken on anything like that.
Yeah, I'm reasonably happy, but some of these facilities have been being discussed for a considerable amount of time, and that's my point. The time that's being spent, and the communities are sitting in a state of flux and don't know where they're coming or going. We need to be bringing these to a conclusion quicker if we possibly can.
Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. In regards to paragraph 3.18, I wonder if when it talks about members in particular, how will that bear out? Just get clarity on that, please.
Chair, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're happy to update ward members on a month-by-month basis. We'll do that how you wish, electronically, by briefing note, or we'll come and meet with the ward members to update you as matters progress. But I think at the very least, on a month-by-month basis, we're happy to provide ongoing written updates through email, if that's appropriate.
Chair, I mean, electronics fine with me. That may well stimulate a meeting thereafter, but electronics fine. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. It's going back to the issue of consistency that I raised earlier, in particular within the parameters that Councillor Nicholl has just mentioned. And I can think of two communities in Mid-Galloway, only a few miles apart, where in fact some of us felt that the decision was taken to close one particular set of premises with almost indecent haste. They never closed. The community, to their credit, stepped up to the plate. They've taken them over. Dare I say, they're making a better job of the running of it thus far than the council did. But several miles down the road, we've got a situation which has not yet been determined in relation to the other community. Now, you're hearing, I'm beginning to hear comments about the fact that, well, it would seem that, one community being treated one way and another community being treated possibly another way. And it's imperative, Chair, in my view, that we do not allow that perception to develop. And I think we've got to do, I'm not suggesting, as I've said, so that we move with indecent haste, but we've got to be there. We've got to make it abundantly clear, in fact, that these decisions are taken timelessly.
Okay, Archie.
Thanks very much, Chair. It's just coming back to what was mentioned before in 3.9 about the ongoing costs and things like that, and also what Councillor Ferguson was on about with regards interdepartmental discussions and things like that. Obviously, one of the issues with taking on community assets is the capability of the management teams, and capacity building, of course, is really important to make sure that the future of that particular building or buildings is in safe hands. So I'm just wondering about how do we make sure the capacity buildings there? Are we talking to CLD, for instance, to make sure that that's ongoing? Is the recording of, for instance, you talk about maintenance of heaters and things like that, where there are grants available for new heating facilities for buildings, that's taken into consideration for future budget savings within this department?
Yeah, Chair, I'm certainly happy to confirm that we're working closely with community learning development colleagues in terms of capacity building, and there will be ongoing dialogue with the community management groups to make sure that we're not setting something up to fail. We need to make sure that we're supporting the community management groups, not only in terms of building their capacity, their knowledge, their skill sets to run these facilities, but also then signposting them for external grants, etc., etc. So yeah, it's not something that we will just walk away from. It's about a partnership moving forward.
Finlay, last word.
Just very quickly, from what that's just been said, the whole end point of this operation is actually to transfer as many of these community assets to the community as possible, and these management contracts are just a route to smoothing the path to communities actually taking them over. I assume that's going to be the case in every single example we've got.
Okay, I mean, I think we've given this a good airing, and before I move to the recommendation, I would point out the reason this is here today is the fault of elected members, no biting the bullet 10, 12 years ago, because I can remember this coming to a specific committee then, and members prevaricated because you had different ways of handling village halls, etc., in the different districts of the area. I mean, I'm well aware that most of the community centres in Dumfries have been run by management committees for donkey's years. They pay a peppercorn rent, they're quite happy running them, they keep the income, they pay the peppercorn rent to the council. Council comes in, replaces their central heating every so often, makes sure it's wind and water tight. It works okay, and it's just a case of extending that across the region. But if we move to the recommendations, I think we've given this a very good airing. Everyone's had their say. Can we agree the recommendations 2.1 to 2.4? Members happy? Okay. Move on to item 6, the DG Health and Wellbeing Performance Report. Oh, sorry, getting ahead of myself there. Commonwealth Youth Leadership Summit, an international youth work event hosted by the Dumfries and Galloway Council, Director of Community and Customer Services. This report outlines the plans for the prestigious Commonwealth Youth Summit event, which is scheduled to take place in Dumfries from Friday the 6th to Sunday the 9th of June. A total of 320 places available, and these will be taken up by youngsters from all over Scotland and 10 Commonwealth countries, as well as people from Dumfries and Galloway. DG1 will remain conference-based, and the participants will be accommodated in a camp in the Dock Park. Keynote speaker will be Becky Adlington, the Olympic swimmer, and David Grevenberg, Chief Executive Glasgow 2014, will also attend to provide advice on leadership. And after sponsorship, our contributions link will be 40k. I'm sure that members have got questions, so if members get any questions, Kirsty's here to answer them. Any questions? No questions, move to the recommendations. Members happy to agree with this? Okay, move on to item 6, which is health and wellbeing, performance report by the Director, Community and Customer Services. The Council and NHS agreed to establish a joint health and wellbeing unit in 2011, and this report gives us an update on the work of the unit as detailed in the action plan, and specifically draw members' attention to summary of progress on pages 108 and 109. Dr Cox and Richard Graveson are with us today, and they will be happy to answer any questions which members may have. Members have any questions? If there are no questions, Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, can you ask why the KPIs aren't in colour?
Very good question. Mr Haswell.
I thought members had been issued with a separate coloured copy. I can only apologise for that. I certainly had one in my desk.
This will look into officers being treated better than elected members.
I'm sorry. Do you want to move over this one and get coloured copies, or are you quite happy to deal with it without coloured copies?
No, I thought it was just a conspiracy. I like to hide all the red and ambers.
Chair, I'm sure this report has been to many other committees and area committees and such like. I'm just wondering what the overall feedback was from those particular committees, and has there been any enhancement to the action plan because of those particular meetings within council?
Yes, thanks for that. The feedback from area committees around this report was not entirely positive, but it was not entirely positive not because of the major overall content of the report, but because they felt that it didn't reflect just what was going on in their own area. It was very much region-wide report. So we haven't modified in any particular way this report because we felt that this committee was the one that was going to be dealing with the region-wide issues.
Thank you. Any other questions? Jane?
Yes, it's really not so much a question to Dr Cox possibly, but to you, Chairman, which is that do you think that we ought to be able to see what we're looking at with respect to resources when you look at an action plan? I mean, I have absolutely no idea what level of resources are applied to any section of this action plan. I've got no idea how really to measure, whether I'm having an effect with this. I think there's a lot of good work going on in here, but I wouldn't know that, for sure. I'd find it quite difficult to be sure that we're using public money to the best effect if I simply look at this. So I'm sort of really looking to question how we can meaningfully use the information that's here, the actions that are here, and consider whether or not we should be tweaking it or putting resources in a different place. So I'm really saying I'm not absolutely sure that this is totally fit for purpose. What am I being asked to do?
Yeah. Mr. Haswell?
Yes, thanks very much. I do appreciate that the action plan that the unit has is incredibly complex, and it's very difficult to produce a report that isn't going to be a tome in itself by going into every single detail. But I will have to be guided by the committee as to the nature of the report that they're looking for. If you're looking for a very detailed breakdown of the finances and how these finances have been applied, we can produce that. But I hope you will understand that in order to eke out what has been, at least in my book, a relatively modest resource that we've got to put into this, we're often allocating sums of money like £2,000 and £5,000 to get projects off the ground and to facilitate projects. Now, of course, there are other much more major things that we are also spending money on. And if we're going to talk about finance, I wonder if I can crave the committee's indulgence just to say something about the financial aspects of the unit. I mean, I've always emphasised when speaking about the development of this joint unit, both within Dumfries and Galloway and when I've been speaking about it throughout Scotland, which I have done, I've always emphasised the visionary nature of the council decision to come in with us to form this joint board and to put resource, both recurring and non-recurring, into the unit. That has moved us away enormously from the position when I came here as Director of Public Health in 1999, where I think the council, if it saw something that had a health label on it, said that's for the NHS to deal with. And we've now moved into a position where we've got a genuine recognition that health is everybody's business, and the council have, in effect, put its money where its mouth has been around that. And I've always emphasised the visionary nature of that decision. And I think as a result of it, we have done some really good new work. Importantly, we've been able to sustain some really good work that was at risk of not being sustainable. But I have to tell you that we are coming to a watershed in the unit over resources. It's in part because of Scottish Government considerations, and it's in part because of the expectations that we have as to the sorts of things that we might be able to do. So let me give you a kind of couple of illustrations of both of these aspects of things. We run projects that are targeted at people who are in very vulnerable circumstances, largely, although not exclusively, people who are on welfare benefits, and we know that that's a big issue just now. And these projects have been funded on an apparently recurring basis through the Scottish Government. So, for example, we run the project called Keep Well, which is targeting people in deprived circumstances, looking particularly at coronary heart disease. And the funding for that, amounting to some £220,000 a year, is being withdrawn next year completely. We run, at the other end of the scale, the Children's Healthy Weight Initiative, looking at obese and overweight children living in families, and we've done some tremendous work around that. And again, the funding for that is being withdrawn next year. And when I look at the sorts of things, and that's not the only example, the Healthy Working Lives funding, which funds the projects that we run alongside employers, alongside yourselves as an employer and the NHS, but also multiple small businesses throughout Dumfries and Galloway. That funding is being withdrawn. So we are at a real crisis point, not this year, but in the following financial year. If I look at some of the ambitions that we've had, we've done, as a result of being able to spend a little bit of money on this last year, we've done a very innovative, good piece of work around a needs assessment around veterans, a group of people who have lots and lots of health and well-being problems and who deserve our attention to help them out. We have done that piece of work. We have consulted with veterans themselves. We've made proposals as to what we should be doing, and we cannot identify any resource for that. So the other aspect that I've touched on is the aspect about welfare reform, where virtually all of the groups of people that we work with and work for are people in receipt of welfare benefits, and we've seen the problems of that group, and we were hoping to be able to put some additional resource into some projects specifically aimed at welfare reform issues, and we've been able to do some of that on a non-recurring basis. But the people who are in receipt of welfare benefits in Dumfries and Galloway are suffering, their health and well-being is suffering, and we don't have an adequate resource to help to ameliorate that. We've got lots of projects that are running on short-term funding, which again are trying to address some of these problems. So if I take, for example, the project that we are running at the moment, looking at the health and well-being of people who are carers, we find that carers as a group have enormous levels of anxiety, depression, and low levels of well-being. And we've been able to demonstrate with this project that we can influence that and we can substantially improve the well-being and mental health of these groups of carers. But this is a project that has been funded through the Putting You First project for 2 years and is going to come to an end this year. Ditto, we are doing a very innovative piece of work with people on community payback orders. Again, a group of people with huge health and well-being issues. We've only been running that project for 6 months and already have identified 10 people with undiagnosed hepatitis C. So that's a project that is going really well. It's been funded for 1 year out of drug and alcohol funding, and again, the funding for that's going to come to an end. So I'm just trying to indicate to the committee that of all of the good work that we have done and are doing, we really are at a point where come April 2015, I think there are going to be real difficult financial issues to be addressed. I'm sorry to be so gloomy.
I go back to it. So it's even more important that we get an idea about what's working. And with the best will in the world, Chairman, I can't take that from here. I find it incredibly difficult to take that from here. The Putting You First plan and projects, because they are projects, have been very specifically aimed at certain areas of the region. And so we ought to be able to see if they've been working, in Annandale and Eskdale, and there's been absolutely nothing with respect to the Putting You First projects in the stewardship. We ought to be able to see a difference. I'm not saying, that's pretty crude, don't get me wrong, it is crude, but we ought to be able to be seeing that or have some other measurement. So I'm really saying that I'm not hostile in any shape or form. Don't get me wrong, I'm not hostile, but I cannot take from this advantages which I ought then to apply to the budgets process.
We can include something in the recommendations if that's okay with you. Alistair, do you want to come in now?
Well, yes, as a member of the Wigton Area Committee, my assessment of the presentation when it was made was that it was extremely well received indeed, and certainly the principle of it. But I do have to agree with Councillor Maitland that at the end of the day, it's absolutely imperative that we get the resource implications of the various headings here quantified to allow us, apart from anything else, Chair, to look at whether or not we need to order or to come to some order of prioritisation, because I doubt very much indeed whether or not we will have the funding, to cover everything. And I think it's imperative on that basis, sir, that we do, in fact, have the information which would allow us, in fact, to reach some degree of priority ranking. In saying that, and I'll endeavour to keep my comments apolitical, I think that at the end of the day, that the issue of the lack of social justice is becoming ever more important in the community in which we're living. And interestingly enough, given the canvassing that's taking place at the moment in relation to events later on in the current year in September, that is an issue which, in my understanding, is looming ever larger. So I think we'd be well advised as representatives of the people to appreciate that and to endeavour to do something in a positive fashion to address it. And while I have no particular desire to ask Dr. Cox and his colleagues to get involved in additional work, it would certainly not be for the sake of it. I think we do need further information. I think we do need just exactly details on which projects within this report are performing better than others. If so, why that should be the case, and also what the detailed resource implications would be, Chair, with a view to, in fact, taking, hopefully, in my view, at least as many of these forward as possible, after the April of next year. And making the point, Chair, I accept that there is no way that is going to avoid or elide the responsibility for additional work to be carried out. But I think if we agree the principle of this and the desire, as it were, to develop it and to refine it and to prioritise it, we've got to get down that particular route, Chair.
Thank you. Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. I think the questions are relevant and appropriate, but what's confusing me, this report's here, it's here for noting, and we're asking questions, particularly because I think it's absolutely right. At the end of the day, each councillor comes in, they want to leave a legacy that's a positive legacy, and we're thinking of the future health of the whole Dumfries and Galloway, people within it, how we best influence that. But where does this lie in community customer services? I'm looking at the delegations. I don't see actually. I see it's here to know it as information, but where does it actually lie? Where do the actions come from? Does it come back here? Does it go to social work, community health, social care partnership board, policy? I'm getting completely confused. So I'd like some clarity in regards to that, because we're asking for information for future decisions. But does it actually lie here in the first place?
Yes, sir. It lies within the remit of this committee, in that the Health and Wellbeing Unit was established by the Council and the NHS jointly. It was officers from community and customer services, particularly in leisure and sport and CLD and areas like that. This is a community initiative. It's not a social work initiative, nor is it strictly a health initiative. It's a community initiative whereby we're looking at, I think, just to quote you, we're looking at the health and wellbeing of the community of Dumfries and Galloway as a whole. So it clearly lies within the remit of this committee. I think the points which members are making are very valid about funding and the ability to prioritise funding. And what I would say, Chairman, is certainly I would hope that Richard and Dr Cox would get their heads together and see if they could bring something back to members, not immediately, because there will be issues arising coming up to next financial year. If this is going to be a budget pressure, members need to know about it when they're fixing their budgets or before they fix their budgets, so that they can make an allowance for it. So certainly within about 6 months, if there are budget pressures coming through the door, I think members need to know about them, and then they also need to have enough information to prioritise which of these pressures they're going to address, because budgets are getting tighter.
Thanks, Chairman. I think you mentioned it earlier, but that's the exact point I was going to pick up on, what Alex picked up in there. If we could pick up on that in the recommendations, happy to go forward with it.
Thanks, Chair. Both Derek and Richard know that at the Public Health Committee this had a real old-fashioned hearing. And I think what we've actually got here is two cultures with a different language. First, it's obviously in English. The presentation is known normally the style we would have with exception reports for here. And I did raise that point at the Public Health Committee, and there were indications then that as we moved into an integrated world, again, because integration is not about social work, it's about the council, that we should be endeavouring to bring about a standardised reporting process in terms of KPIs that would actually be that both partners in the partnership would understand and be able to scrutinise properly. I jokingly said about the colour thing, there are significant areas here where no action has actually taken place at all. And I think the question we'd be asking if this would be the council, purely a council initiative, is, well, why, if the assessment is not to start them, then that should have been reported back earlier. But I appreciate, Derek, that this is an update thing, and it's quite a bit out of date, really. It's last autumn, I think, isn't it? This was produced initially. So I think the new updated one, we need to find some common ground here where we can actually report in a sort of standardised fashion to the two organisations.
Well, I think that's a matter that obviously Dr Cox and Richard can talk about, what a standard reporting setup. It takes two to tango. I mean, if we did it in council speak, the health board might not agree to it. So I think we can leave that to the officers to discuss. Are there any other questions on the actual report itself? Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just on some of the minutiae. Outcome 2.21 on page 88. Action 2.21A, and this is on the person-centred approach in terms of developing local opportunities. It's just a point of clarity, really. It mentions the progress that 3 services now engaged with implementation. Input is a little variable. Drop-off in reporting, more training required. Policy developed for NHS staff, including manager training. So I would like to be able to read that and sort of gauge when the rest of that action will be completed. Or at least sort of get, and I can go through, there's a couple of other points I've sort of highlighted, so I don't get any sense of, well, what happens next, or is that it? So just another one, I'll get 3 in if that's okay. Action 2.2.2c, this is building healthy communities. They've established some groups to support carers. So is that job done? Do you know what I mean? I don't really know where that goes next, if you see what I mean. And the KPI status on page 102, this is to do with the number of referrals increased from secondary care and key clinical specialities. Start Jan 2013, and there's the one below it, planned start 2013, but there's no further narrative to really give a sense of what, if anything, has happened or what milestones we might sort of look out for to sort of determine whether we're doing the right, you know, where it's going. So, I mean, throughout the report, there's a kind of variation in how sort of actions are reported, and it's really just flagging up those three, for example. I don't know if you've got any further details for today, but if that could be maybe addressed. Thank you.
I'm really going to apologise that I, because there are so many things going on within this unit, I don't have a complete handle on all of these issues. If you would bear with me, I can get the people who are involved in these to give you individual report back to these questions, if that would be satisfactory.
I think that'd be okay if you can do that and supply that to Councillor Thompson. That'd be very helpful. Are there any other questions, Councillor Driver?
Yeah, I think certainly in Annandale and Essex, we see the putting you first issues going forward. There's a lot of good things actually going on, but there's a lot of duplication as well in some of the issues that are being worked through. For instance, working with hard to reach older people, for instance. One of the good things that's actually happened out there is the telecare, for instance, and also the work that Dr. Cox and his previous assistant Linda McFarland did on veterans. I certainly know that well. And I think that the issue for me is that there's a lot of things coming through. There's a lot of issues happening from council as well, from community learning development, social work, that type of thing. And it's making sure that that integration understands what we said before. The priorities are actually the same, and the language is the same, that we as elected members can understand it to put our priorities forward when we move forward. I think what's been happening over the year is, and Dr. Cox mentioned it earlier on, that we're actually seeing a whole community approach to health and well-being, rather than just it being on the NHS as a part of the problem. And it's the simpler things that can be done by members of family, community and community groups certainly helps that perspective of isolation and that type of thing, which again encourages well-being. So I agree with everything that the members have actually said here. I think we need to get that priority in place, get better sort of key performance indicators that we would understand. And I think if you look at the duplication of some of the issues that are actually being here, we could actually make sure that our resources are placed in the appropriate places.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we can move on to the recommendations, and I think first recommendation is to note, but I think members have raised the issue of the resource implications, and I really think that needs to be another recommendation, that we get a future report on resource implications. Are members happy to go with that? Jane?
Well, yes, it is, but I hope that will be telling us what has been more or less successful, or what. I'm just saying, I can't really tell very much from this, as it stands. This is the problem, and maybe I'm missing something, but, I know, for example, that this area is a major prescriber of antidepressants. That's what we've been told. But, where does that fit in to what is happening here with respect to building healthy communities? Am I reducing that level of dependency upon antidepressants, for example, through this work?
Well, that's why we're asking for a report on the resource implications.
Okay, well, yeah, that's okay. Slightly wider than
right, and the allow in is it on the recommendations?
Actually, Chair, and I tell you what, I think there needs to be an understanding that this unit deals with such a variety of issues, some that we can measure very easily, some which will take 20, 30, even 40 years to actually show an improvement. So there needs to be an understanding exactly of the work of the unit when we actually start to, we drill down into things. I know I talked about it earlier, but I think we actually be absolutely clear in that. And it would be really helpful when we do get the joint reporting back to actually tell us if these are long, short-term, where we can see the benefits.
I don't think that's a problem. I think officers have taken on board the comments we've made, and we want to say we'll have the first recommendation here to note the progress, but we need a further report on the resource implications of all the issues that have been raised by members. I think that's the easiest way, and I think we'll leave that to Mr Haswell to coordinate. That's all right with him. He's always looking for jobs to do. No, I'm sorry, and we've moved on. We've done the recommendations. I'm moving on.
Chairman,
to
I'd just like to make a comment in regards to you've put forward a recommendation towards the recommendations, and you've said it's for on the resource and implications. I just want to make sure that, because we spoke about it previously in our discussions here, that will give us the information we need for future budget decisions as well. That's why I would want to be absolutely clear on that.
That was implicit, because obviously the number of issues raised by members hopefully have been noted, and that we will get a report back. And that's why, because we'll all be fixing the budget in about 6 months' time, so this impacts. Yep. Move on to item 7, which is the legacy plan. This was approved by Policy and Resources in September 2013. Report covers progress made in the last 6 months. Council has committed £100,000 to deliver across the 4 themes. We've had the International Commonwealth Youth Summit, which we've already discussed. We've got the Big Burn Supper, already identified as beacon event. And the other big one is the 24 golf clubs within the region and 20 accommodation providers are also taking part in the legacy. And of course the Spring Fling, which is just starting this week, that is also involved. And I think members have been updated on the arrangements for the Queen's Baton Relay and been told about the programme. And the other thing is that the winners from the 2013 Active Games from this region will be travelling to Belfast 23rd and 24th of May to compete in the Belfast Active Games. I think it's a fairly comprehensive report, and if there's any questions, Richard and Ailsa Freeman are here to answer them. Have any questions on the report? If not, members happy to accept the recommendations. Thank you very much. Moving on, item 8, Animal Health and Welfare Framework, report by Director of Planning and Environmental Services. I think the background to this is the Scottish Government's issued a new Animal Health and Welfare Framework, which is detailed in this report. Also included is a service delivery plan for the region, which we've been asked to approve. Of course, must note the plan will result in an increase in service delivery. The financial provision has been made for this, but I feel it's important that we deliver a service which is appropriate to Dumfries and Galloway rather than just the minimum statutory requirement. This is also going to be a budget pressure, and I think that we as a committee should be asking for a further report from Sandra regarding level of service which is required. And again, Sandra's here to answer any questions on the report. Alistair, do you have any points you wish to raise?
Well, yes, as I said in previous discussions with you, sir, I think that this is it's a good report because it tells, as far as I'm concerned, it tells me, and I would hope it tells the rest of the committee, what we need to know, rather than perhaps on occasions, what we think we want to hear. And I must confess that I've already raised some of these points at the worthwhile seminars that we had some time ago with members of the department's management team. And to me, the blunt fact of the matter, sir, is that we are not providing the level of the standard that the legislation requires us to provide, and it's quite clearly spelled out in the report. And that, to me, is not only an unsatisfactory, Chair, but also an untenable situation. I mean, there are various areas where, for instance, we are providing a below minimum service in relation to the various aspects of the legislation. And I think, as I've said, that really isn't acceptable. And at the very least, what I would be expecting Sandra and her colleagues to do, such as the colleagues are, would be to give us the resource implications involved in raising, the below minimum standards, at least to minimum standards. And if there are any other areas, in fact, where we're currently operating at minimum standard and it's felt appropriate that we should be increasing these to better practice, or if not good practice, that we should get indication of the resource implications of doing so as well. And that way it allows us, and I accept entirely what I'm alluding to, would almost inevitably be a budget pressure, But at the end of the day, it would allow us, if we get that information timelessly, as I'm sure we will, to feed that into the next year's budgetary process and to address an area where, quite frankly, in my opinion, Chair, we're unacceptably weak. And bearing in mind as well, you know, that the extent to which this region is dependent on the agricultural industry, as it were, for such prosperity as it has. And I think that this has got to be recognised and addressed, and hopefully we can take it forward next year's budget in a positive fashion. Thank you.
Want to say anything on that, Sandra? We're quite happy to hear the wise words of Councillor Geddes there.
I've no comment on that at the moment. You've taken the points out of the report, and it was written in that fashion so that it was clear. So thankfully, you found it quite clear.
Very helpful indeed, sir.
It's just a factual question. Page 149, and I would just ask the officer, what is a high risk farm in that context? Page 5.5.
A high risk farm would be determined by the risk assessment that is part of the framework. It would be to do with the number of livestock and the number of movements for the farms. We haven't risk rated our farms yet, but we know that that's what it would come under.
Just going back to Alice's question in regards to, I'm thinking of your question, resourcing next year and the service reviews that we undertook last year. I would have thought the bulk of that information should have been contained within the service reviews. Just to get clarity on that, please.
At the point of doing the service review, we hadn't compiled our service delivery plan. That's been done since the service review. However, at that point, we did know that we weren't going to meet the minimum standards in a lot of the categories in the service delivery plan. We had identified as part of the service review that we did need additional resources, and as a result, we will be gaining an extra member of staff, probably 0.6 FTE, to act as support staff.
Finlay?
Thanks, Chair. My question's just on duplication. I've always been concerned when I've looked at the remit, even down to the minimum standard that the council have to carry out with regards to animal movements and animal identification. And aware that CIRAD also carry out checks like this. How much duplication is there in the likes of, you know, on page 147 with enforcement activities on animal health and welfare compliance and whatever? How much duplication or overlap is there with CIRAD officers or controls put in place with BCMS and the likes?
Maybe explain for those that are uninitiated amongst us what CIRAD is. What's the acronym?
Scottish Environmental. It's the farm. It's the farming side, agricultural Department for Agriculture. It used to be called.
Maybe Sandra knows.
Scottish Environment Rural Affairs Division, I think, is what it's called. The whole idea of the framework is, or one of the main ideas of the framework, is to minimise duplication and overlap of efforts, because everyone struggles for resources now, so we can't afford to be duplicating. So the framework itself has been drawn up along with the AHVLA, which is the Animal Health and Veterinary Laboratories Agency, had to think there. So it's been drawn up in partnership with them to avoid duplication. We communicate with our partner agencies a lot to ensure that if they're doing a cross-compliance inspection, for example, then we will either be part of that or we'll use the information that they've gained as a result. And we also use the database, BCMS database, movement database, to minimise the efforts that are involved. We'll use that information rather than going out onto farms if we can.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at page 140 and I'm looking at 4 at the top, and it's showing high risk 34, medium risk 10, low risk 2308, and a further 2,500 farms that you're aware of, but not in the database, but have still to be risk assessed under the framework. Am I reading this right? Is this all to be undertaken by 1.6 full-time equivalents?
Yes. Basically, there are 1.6 full-time equivalent staff dedicated to animal health and welfare. There are other officers who are authorised but don't have an up-to-date training and competencies who can assist if there was an emergency, but basically all this work is to be done by 1.6 full-time equivalent.
Can I come back on that, Chair? That has to be on the Council's risk register, because that's putting us at risk.
Well, can I say it's one of the reasons why some of us, when we're discussing the setup of the council, wanted this department, trading standards and environmental health, to have a public profile, because for years they've been getting cut back within the PHE&S department. There's no reports coming up to elected members to say what these people were doing for a job. We were getting very little recognition. And I think it's high time elected members woke up to the fact these departments have been taking the brunt of the cutbacks because we're out of sight and out of mind. So I think that if members are so minded, then when it comes to the budget, we try and make sure, if it still comes under the EEI budget for the moment, I think we've got to make sure that to carry out our statutory duties, things are properly funded. This reminds me very much of the social work department 30 years ago, where they weren't even implementing bits of statute that had been brought in the 1950s. Anyway, I digress. Archie.
You've just said what I was going to say, Chair. There you go.
Finlay?
Thanks. So this is a daft laddie question. I just can't...
You're a very man to ask it, may I say.
Exactly. Thank you very much. I just can't see, and I know from my agricultural background, I could never understand why the council had to play any role in the movements or animal identification or health when we had a Department of Agriculture. Is there anything we can do as a council to try and take these minimum statutory requirements away? Because it would appear that the officer, I don't know how they possibly do their job across Dumfries and Galloway. It must be almost impossible to carry out the task that you're being given. But we have, as you say, the likes of the Department of Agriculture or Sederunt and BCMS who hold these records, and all the council are doing are referring and cross-referencing someone else's department's information. Is there any argument that we can put forward as a council that it shouldn't be a local authority's remit to carry out some of these checks?
There have been discussions at a national level about both environmental standards and SEPA and also trading standards and the agricultural people. I think these discussions are ongoing. At the moment, I think, to be fair to Ms Hartness, there are statutory requirements on the council and she is doing her best to explain to you how she's undertaking them. Even if you could change the law, you won't change the law overnight, and I think there has been discussion in COSLA about these issues. So I think it's a case of watch this space, Councillor Carson, and if there's any consultation papers come out, you can be assured they'll come to members. But what we're basically doing at the moment is saying these are the duties imposed on the council, that's the resource we have to deliver them, that's the size of the problem, and I think members are clearly indicating that they want to get more information on the basis of this report as to the level of service, which is not necessarily just the statutory minimum, but adequate for Dumfries and Galloway, and then you're going to look at the resource implications. In the meantime, the service requires to continue to deliver the services it does. And I think what we are doing, and that's come across from Ms Hartness, is where there's data collection, we're sharing data, we're not doing a duplication, which I think happened in the past, where you had two services collecting the same data, and that's probably what annoyed some of our farming colleagues right royally, having to fill out 2 sets of forms every time anything moved. But you've got the assurance that we are using the resource that we've got to the best of our ability, and that we're sharing resources with people who are equally under the cosh in terms of resource availability.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. Can move to the recommendations. Can accept recommendation 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4. Thank you. Move on to item 9. Trading Standards National Priorities. And the Scottish Government has now established a Trading Standards Scotland, which includes an intelligence unit. And this report gives us further information on the role of these services and highlights the new national priorities which we're asked to endorse. So do members have any questions for Sandra in this particular report? Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. It's probably more a point for yourself and the rest of the members, because I agree with the report in its entirety. I used to be a member of the Consumer Protection Task Group, which was the organisation that helped set up Trading Standards Scotland. But I think it would benefit the members of the Dumfries and Galloway Council and this committee in particular if we could have a presentation from Trading Standards Scotland just on how that works, how it's evolved and how it looks to progress in the future. So I wonder if that's a possibility of adding that. Maybe we could request Trading Standards Scotland to come down to a future meeting and do a presentation on what their remit is and how they look to work in partnership with Dumfries and Galloway Council.
Sandra, you have anything to say on that one?
I'm sure Trading Standards Scotland could certainly be requested to do that. They're in the business of trying to raise the profile of trading standards, so that would be probably quite a good request to make of them, and I'm happy to make that request.
Thanks very much, Chair. As far as I'm concerned, again, helpful report. Back of what Ian's saying, perhaps it might be worthwhile considering a third recommendation to the effect that we get, as it were, further details at the appropriate time as to how these, well, at the moment they're designated as preliminary national priorities, but as to how these will in fact be developed in a Dumfries and Galloway context once in fact have been finally determined.
Thanks, Chair. This was actually discussed at the COSLA meeting that I attended just a few weeks ago. And the presentation there was actually a joint one between Police Scotland and Trading Standards Scotland, and that went down really well. So I would suggest, whilst there was a degree of confidentiality in what some of the current tasks, operations they were working on, they were actually able to give us some actually really good examples of how it is working in practice for different types of doorstep crime, for example. So I would support that, and it is moving forward in the National Executive. I think it's going to the leaders' meeting, I'm not sure, pretty soon at COSLA.
Thank you. Any other questions? Move to recommendation to accept recommendation 2122 and add recommendation 23 to invite trading standards to address a future seminar and take on board the comments made by Alistair vis-a-vis the dealing with the national priorities. Members happy to do that. We can move on to item 10, Dumfries Gull Project 2013. Some of this report is good news and provides members feedback on the successful programme of egg and nest removal undertaken last year. Also provides members with a copy of the report by the Urban Gull Task Force on the management of gull problems in Dumfries for 2014 season. The management strategy appears to be very successful and is now achieving national acclaim. And Martin Taylor's here to answer any questions. Now, do members have any questions? John?
5 years now. Oh, sorry, Mike. Been around for 5 years now, and the pairs of gulls seems to be rising all the time. Is there any indication when they will start be going down? Because I see, I'm just wondering if we're having a problem now because we're moving them out of the town centre onto the town edge, and the numbers are rising up, and also the complaints. The complaints seem to be rising year by year as well. As I say, they were starting to go down, but now they seem to be going up again. Is this because we are displacing them to the town centre, from the town centre to the peripherals of the town?
Martin?
Yes, Chair. There are slight movements, natural movements in the numbers each year. I think, and this information has only just become available, the numbers that we are seeing, in theory, because of our actions, should be reducing, particularly this year. The life cycle of the gull means that 4 years after breeding, the young gulls tend to return to their natal site to continue the breeding cycle. So we should be seeing numbers reducing. Unfortunately, the information we've just come by, the Rockcliffe marshes last year were decimated by the floods. In 2009, we had over 4,000 breeding pairs of gulls on the Rockcliffe marshes, just across the water. We have seen significant reduction in those numbers of gulls breeding each year. And last year, because of the floods, not one young gull was reared on those marshes. I suspect what we're going to see this year, time will tell, is that those 4,000 breeding pairs on the Rockcliffe marshes will be looking for an alternative home. There are natural changes in the gull numbers, despite our efforts. And you're right, the part of the project is successful because of the destruction of eggs. This reduces significantly if you look at the numbers of eggs that we have removed each year. However, it has to be recognised that the disturbance and the displacement of gulls is having an effect on other areas out with the town centre.
Aye, as I say, we've got the likes of residents in Cargan Bridge. We're getting complaints there about gulls nesting at the DuPont site there, and I think it is because of the height of the buildings, etc., and the way the materials that the roofs are built with in that site, that we are not actually removing eggs or that. The eggs are that because it'd be far too expensive for to get equipment in to do them because of the height of the buildings, etc. We've also got, say, my own ward, Barkerland Avenue, round about there, the high flats there. The gulls are nesting there. Do we take action if somebody reports nests in the likes of these higher buildings where we need to bring in extra equipment to move them? And as I say, is there have we got a list of the buildings that we can't really, because of the height, we can't really remove the eggs from?
Chair, the problem was recognised. Last year we, for the first time, asked our contractor to get a very large access platform. The platform has a 35-metre reach, and what we found last year, there are now very, very few properties that we can't actually get access to. The very tall buildings you mentioned in Cargan Bridge, yes, they are unfortunately out of reach. However, we have had words already in meetings with the property owners down there and are trying our best to convince them to take action on what is their property. They recognise that there's a big nuisance factor and a possible danger to their staff, so they are at this stage suggesting they will come on board to deal with the issue on these very tall buildings you mentioned. Barkerland Avenue, normally we don't have a difficulty in accessing properties with either the smaller or the large mechanical access platform. The one difficulty we sometimes have on flatted properties is that we need the permission from everybody within the block in order to take action. We do need the owner's permission to go on their roofs to remove nests and or eggs. And sometimes there are still individuals that are not happy to give that permission.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, Finlay?
I had a word with a manager of one of the town centre shopping, the town centre shopping manager. He suggests there was still an issue with rubbish in the White Sands, particularly after a Friday and a Saturday night, where carloads of young folk, excuse me, I presume it's young folk, tend to drop the litter outside the cars and then drive off. Now, they are aware that the street cleansing crews are out 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, clear that up. But during the summer with the lighter evenings, and the lighting now down at the White Sands, when these cars move off at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's a lot of seagull activity. So they're actually getting fed long before the street sweepers are out cleaning that, and he suggested that was a real issue. He was aware that there was on-the-spot fines for littering, and there seems to be an increase on community officers in that area, but he was suggesting it might be an idea for the CCTV crews to actually have a look at some of the folk using the White Sands car parks in the early hours of Friday and Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, and actually have an increased presence or effort to stop people throwing rubbish out of their cars for the seagulls to eat before they get swept up.
Very valid point. It's something I haven't been aware of, but now it's something we can have a look at. I'll discuss with colleagues in community safety, and yes, if there's a problem area, see if we can address it.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. It was just 3.19. It was just to do with food acquisition by swooping, and I was just wondering the impact that this consideration might have in terms of the type of street furniture, etc., for the Burns statue renovation works, and what would likely see as a result of that.
It's a recognised problem that gulls are very intelligent birds, and yes, they can associate lunchtime and school children with potential food. They will congregate in the area and use street furniture, tall buildings as vantage points to see what food is becoming available. We've had discussions about possible mechanical ways of discouraging birds from perching on street lights and so on. I think we've seen some street lamps now provided with spikes. There's always going to be a little bit of a conflict between those that desire lots of nice cast iron signs for tourists and visitors to the area, and those that want these structures removed to prevent perching to gulls.
So thanks for that. So what sort of impact do you think that'll have on the street furniture for the Burns statue works? Like,
sorry, I can't answer the specific question.
Just coming on what Finlay was saying about the White Sands car parks, I think the police in that are very aware about that problem that is taking place in the car parks, because I think it was about 18 months ago they actually had a major operation over the whole of the weekend between there were plainclothes officers, cars, unmarked cars, etc. It wasn't just the rubbish in the car park, they were hunting for the boy racers going round about as well. And as I say, action with the community wardens that weekend was very successful. So I don't know if they're thinking a repeat there, if the problem is getting greater again, because there was quite a few fines, etc. that weekend, but I think it was about 1.5 years, 2 years ago.
Thank you very much. I think before we move on to the recommendations, just to echo what John has said earlier about Cargan Bridge. That seems to go in 2-yearly cycles. Very few complaints last year, loads the year before, begin to get quite a few again this year. The birds seem to like the shiny new roof that DuPont have erected there. So I think perhaps before the problem gets any worse, I think we should maybe approach them and see if there is anything they can do. I believe a couple of employees took it into their own hands a couple of years ago. Well, I won't tell you exactly what they did, but it wasn't a bad idea for getting rid of the seagulls, put it that way. Strictly illegal, but it worked. However, move on to the recommendations. Can we accept recommendation 2.1 and 2.2? Okay. And move on to item 11. And again, this is very good news that we undertook a community safety survey last year and early this year, and this provides some detail on the work undertaken by our community safety teams. There's also bringing together strategic commissioning, and that'll be coming to a future meeting. However, the Council has a community safety fund, which is a one-off, and the officers recommend this be allocated using a formula for which discretionary grant budgets are allocated through area committees. I think the important thing for us to do today is to determine the criteria for the allocation of the money from these funds, and the criteria are contained in Appendix 3. These will be scored by officers based on the criteria that we determine. However, what I would suggest is that recommendation 2.4 should be amended to read, agree to delegate authority to Community Safety Partnership Lead Officer Group to score the applications based on agreed criteria and to remit with powers to area committees to allocate awards up to a maximum of 2k for each application to Community Safety Fund as detailed in section 334 of this report. It would make sense to me, since within the report we're divvying up the money on an area basis, that this be reported to the area committees. That would also have the effect of probably giving more publicity to what schemes are getting funding, because if it was all decided and determined here at the centre, the media probably wouldn't pick it up, particularly in the far west and the far east. So I think that if it went to respective area committees, it's far more likely that the council would get a bit of recognition for schemes that are helping community safety. So I would hope members could agree to that addition to the recommendations. And Richard and Ailsa are here yet again to answer any questions if members have got any questions on the report. Are there any further questions, Finlay?
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered why we'd kept the maximum at 2,000. You don't get a lot for £2,000 these days, and I know that's 50% of the project cost. So I just wonder why we reached that figure. But Chair, I'm pleased you suggested that the money goes back to the area committee, because on the basis of the way the money was split up, if it was done on a Dumfries and Galloway basis, I would have had reservations as to splitting up using the multiple deprivation weightings. If there's a good project comes forward which is going to benefit people, whether they're in Upper Nithsdale or in a street in Borg or whatever, the application should be viewed in the same light. But I understand from what you're saying, you're suggesting that the money split up into the areas and dealt with on an area basis. Is that correct?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that the area committees can determine the officers will score them. Now, what happens, particularly in Nithsdale, is they end up, all our discretionary budget is spent, unlike the other three districts, because we go oversubscribed. Therefore, elected members have always got a very, very heavy decision to make at April time about how we spend the monies. Now, the division will still be as through the deprivation criteria, right? Well, we're not saying it's done at a region-wide basis. If you read the report, it's so much money going to Nithsdale, so much to the Stewartry. I can't mind the exact figures for each district, but it's contained somewhere in the report. Yep. So that's the amount of money that's going to each area. It'll be 44,000 for Annandale, 71,000 for Nithsdale, 28,000 for Stewartry, 36,000 for Wigton. People can bid in within those areas. Area committees can then determine, if they are oversubscribed, which ones they want to prioritise. But the fund will be divided, as it is for discretionary grants, on that pro rata basis. And that is the fairest way to do it. As for why the figure of 2,000 was determined, I'll leave that for Ailsa to answer.
When we were allocated the 181,000, we looked at various aspects and other funding sources available, and we worked with the external funding unit with regard to the match funding, because we've also recommended that we match fund up to 50% up to the value of £2,000. We felt that with the size of projects that were ongoing in the area and the community groups involved, we talked to the community safety forums and Safe and Healthy Action Partnerships, and we spoke to them about this. We took it to the Community Safety Partnership, and they felt that that was a reasonable amount for the sort of initiatives that would likely to make a benefit within communities, given the spread of our communities across the region, and also the external funds that were available in order that we can maximise the impact of this, so we can effectively turn 181,000 into 362,000 that can be spent directly in our communities in manageable amounts for communities to take forward. So that was the sort of reasoning behind it, if you like.
Other questions? Archie?
Chair, I totally agree with the addition on the recommendations, Chair. I'm just coming back to what Councillor Finlay actually said about £2,000. When you look at £2,000 in reality, of course, and you look at things like midnight football, that's a lot of sessions of midnight football. It's going to be diversionary for those particular areas and that thing. So I think £2,000 is a good amount. It's a real amount. It can certainly help with those groups that are actually helping in that particular area anyway. And then when you look at the potential match funding elsewhere, a lot can be done with that particular fund.
Thank you. Anybody else? George?
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the question 7 on page 196, since the creation of Police Scotland, have we noticed any changes? We've got a response count of 724, either positive or negative, but that's as far as it goes. There's no, I can't find any detail of what the 724 actually are.
Page 196 and...
It's actually, we've mentioned with regard to the community safety survey at 3.1.7 that we posed open-ended questions to get qualitative information, and it's the details there on what the responses have been with regard to positive, negative change, or little or no change with regard to Police Scotland. Well, we've just taken the overall figures from that. We did some analysis on, because obviously the submissions that we had for that were submitted in confidence, and some of the comments people put them in. So we took an analysis of them and gave you an overview in 3.1.7.
Okay. Stephen, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was pleased to see just in the report of the community safety team, obviously there's a lot of the things are above target, and I'm glad to see we're putting our foot down on the dog dirt problem.
Well, when you do that, you get your shoes dirty.
But obviously, the number of sort of complaints or sort of contacts made sort of up a great deal. Is that just down to the greater engagement of the team in the sort of market and so forth? And is that, I noticed the customer satisfaction's up as well, so I presume that's indicating that we are actually dealing with the complaints as they come in.
Yeah, the team have put a lot of effort into engaging with the communities. They've spoken to community councils. They've also increased the profile with regard to the council's website and putting information out to the public to let them know that there is a mechanism there for them to contact so that they can get assistance and that the team can tackle the problem on the ground.
Just on the back of that, I know that a number of community councils have had talks from members of the team just on the services and how to contact them, etc. Has there been a good uptake of that across the whole of the region, or is it, is that something that's been addressed as well?
I know that through Jim Henry sitting beside me in his good offices, that they have been contacting the community councils. There's been a mixed uptake. Some areas have taken it on board, others haven't. I think probably the information has gone out to all community councils to know that the community safety team are available to go and meet with them to discuss any issues that they have.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Oh, Andy?
Thanks, Chair. Just a question here, just to put my mind at ease. We're talking about 50% eligible costs here, but what happens to the really vulnerable groups and the most vulnerable societies who don't have 50% to put into a community safety project? How do we fund them?
The external funding unit have been looking at the different sources of funding that are available for these types of projects, and they will support them along with partnership support, principal officers, partnership support to access these funds. But they have been identified, and we'll keep them up to date. We'll also keep a review going of whether the 50% match funding is actually perhaps prohibitive. It may be that community groups and changes to different criteria and external funds change, and that only perhaps say 30% is available by external funders. But we'll bring that back to committee when we've reviewed it and keep on top of it to make sure that the groups that can access it, that, if there's any changes to criteria, we'll bring that back.
Members happy with that assurance? We move on to the recommendations. Recommendation 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3 and recommendation 2.4 is amended. Members happy with that? Thank you all very much.
Chairman, sorry to come in at the last night. Can we just make it clear to members that you've agreed the criteria? The criteria do not go back to area committees for changing. Thank you. It suddenly struck me there that I might have 4 different sets of criteria for the same grant fund. Thank you.
I have no further business. Thank you all very much for your attendance. Absent friends.